who is looking after the executives who have all this responsibility on the shoulders? At the end of the day, we're all humans. It doesn't matter what position you have and how high up you are in an organization. At the top, it can also be very challenging. And this is a topic that I have looked into in the last 1 year extensively, 1.5 years since I started. And I'm actually writing a book on this topic at the moment. So what I will share with you today is some of the findings that I have come across when I've interviewed senior executives for my book, when I've done some surveys for my book, and I will also share my story with you today on some of the challenges that I come across in my international career working for big multinationals, and also going through some extremely challenging times that I kept inside me for a very long time before I had the confidence to speak up about it. And only when I started to speak up about these challenges, I started to feel better and feel more connected with other people. So let's look into my story. I take you back to year 2018, when I certainly didn't think I could live any longer. I wasn't suicidal, but I had anxiety, depression, and I was really not well. So let me go back a few more years and tell you how this came about. I have to go back 10 years to 2008, when I was living and working in Ho Chi Minh City. And I did pretty well in the job. I had 2 different MDs, they promoted me. I had a 3rd new MD coming in, and we didn't get along so well. And one day I find myself finally outside of a job. I had been terminated. I come home to my wife that day and I share this terrible news, and she said, the timing is not really good for this. I'm pregnant. So the whole world collapsed on me just in that day. I basically had lost my job. And also, when you, as you might know, when you're an expat in another country, you have the house, the car, everything that comes around with it, your insurance and everything else. It just fell all over me. And I couldn't really express this to my family. I didn't want to tell any parents. I didn't see moving back home to Sweden as a solution, because I wanted to prove to myself and to the other people around me that I can do this, that I'm a successful person, and a successful person don't just give up. So here I was in Vietnam with anxiety, and luckily, as things turned out, I found another job, a job that I did quite well for, a French-owned company. And I worked for them in Ho Chi Minh City for almost 4 years. Then they relocated me over to Indonesia, Jakarta. My son now 5 years old, and we're moving over to Jakarta. Everything will be fine. I still have anxiety inside and I'm not so sure about things, but I was pleased that they give me a chance to move on in this company. I started to feel safe. And just as we settled down, my son started school, and 3 months into my job, my company is sold to investors. They decide to lay off 300 of employees, and I'm one of them. So here I find myself again in a new country, being laid off from my work. At this time again, same response. I cannot tell anyone what's going on. This is my own challenge. I keep a poker face, to the extent that this time I really felt that I have to go through this myself. So I asked my today ex-wife, I asked her, please move back to Sweden with your son, with our son, and he can go to school there. I will look after myself here in Indonesia, Jakarta. I will find another job. And that is what I did. A few months, I got a new job. I came into the job, and a really great position, good salary. I'm the GM of 1,400 staff, and everything is going well. I'm delivering well, but I have such anxiety inside me. I feel all the time someone maybe be watching me, when I will be terminated again. And this was just playing in my head over and over and over, like it's on a tape recorder. I just had so much stress. I got one email that where someone maybe was not happy with something, and I played that up to be thinking that I was going to be terminated. So in my mind, I started instead to prepare for being terminated. And I even started to write my resignation letter. And one day when I just got something that didn't go so well, I just sent a resignation letter to my boss. She called me into the office and she said, Nick, what is this? What's going on? You're doing so well. And I was shocked to hear that I was doing well. I didn't even know it. I didn't believe in myself anymore. She said, well, what's wrong with it? Is it Jakarta? Can we move you somewhere else? We have a role in Dubai for you. Do you want to move to US? But in my mind, it was completely gone. couldn't be in this organization anymore. So I just left the organization, and I was really on my own in Jakarta, and I didn't really have a plan what to do and where to go. Luckily, again, I got another role with EGN, and in January 2018, I moved to Singapore, a new opportunity, and I thought this chance I really had to take it. I was still having a lot of anxiety in me, was very busy setting up the job. Things were going quite okay. It was busy, but I felt a lot of stress. At the end of the day, I felt a lot of stress, and I didn't really know how to cope with this. So my way was to go to the bar and drink some beers after work. That was how I winded down. That was what many people did. And I quickly gained 20 kilos in 3 months, my first 3 months in Singapore. My health was falling apart. I was eating bad. I tended to go into every day almost for after work drinks, and it was not good. I felt perhaps relaxed at the time, but the next day I woke up with more anxiety, more pressure on myself, and my whole health fell really, really quickly apart. And to the point where here is my foot in April 2018. It's swollen like this. I went to see doctors. They did x-rays, and there was nothing broken with it. They took blood tests, and they, of course, found that my health was not great. My liver, my kidney was not so good because my diet, and I was consuming too much alcohol, but they couldn't figure it out what it was wrong with my foot. It was only when I saw a specialist, a counselor, that I found out later on that it was a psychosomatic illness, which is basically a mental illness related to stress and anxiety. So that's how this foot was so swollen, I couldn't put on a shoe. And that's when I was basically lying in bed during the days in April 2018 and thinking that my life is over. I was thinking the days have come for me, I have to go again. And still, I was not suicidal. I just was so full of anxiety, and also combined with my physical and mental health breaking down, that this was when I reached the lowest point of my life. I wrote my will, my testament. I prepared everything, because if I should go, at least my ex-wife, my son, and my new wife, who I'm married by this stage, they should have something left if I go. So, but when I had done all of these things, and when I basically was ready to die, and when I started to just talk to some people, I told my ex-wife, I told my parents, I told my wife what was going on, because obviously she could see it. She was by my side when I was lying in bed and I didn't know what was going on. And I was step by step fading away. Then I started to feel a little bit better. That was when I started to recover, by opening up, by talking to people, saying what's going on in my life. When I stopped blocking, just holding all of this tension and anxiety inside me, when I just started to let it go and telling some people, that's when I started to be better. And just as I started to feel better, something happened. My colleague and friend Simon committed suicide. He was just going to speak at one of our upcoming EGN events in Singapore. I had him lined up as a speaker of the future of work. He was working in the recruitment industry, in the HR industry, and he was going to come to one of our events to see how we conduct our events. He didn't show up, which is quite normal. There's always a few no-shows, people are busy, but he didn't show up for this event. Then next day I got an SMS from a friend of mine, and he said that Simon is dead. And I was shocked, and I later on that day found out that he had committed suicide. I spoke to some who knew him, and no one could figure out what was going on. He had everything going for him in his life. He had just come back from Mount Everest, where he had hiked up to the base camp, one of his lifetime dreams. I was following on Facebook, and he was sharing how happy he was. He also had a girlfriend to die for in Singapore, a girlfriend that he had taken pictures with just before, posting on social media saying that he's never been happier. This was what all of us saw. This is what all of us thought was going on in Simon. We had no idea. Even today, we have no idea why on earth did he kill himself. My response to this was not to keep on getting sad and fall back into anxiety and depression. I was already starting my road to recovery by speaking up. And that's when I said to myself, and this is August last year, I need to spread this message to people. And that's when I launched the campaign, Race to an End of Executive Loneliness. I signed up with SOS, the Samaritans of Singapore, a suicide prevention agency, as a volunteer, and I started to conduct events to them, for them to raise their awareness about executive loneliness and about the huge pressure we have as executives of organizations, and that we are holding inside us to the point where people like Simon unfortunately cannot cope anymore, but they commit suicide. So I posted this, my launching of the campaign, on social media. It went viral. I had hundreds of messages from all over the world, people supporting the campaign, saying, Nick, keep spreading this message because no one wants to talk about it. But I said that's when I motivated myself. I got to keep talking about this. Even if it's not pleasant to talk about, someone has to talk about it. So that leads me to ask you a question. We're going to have a brief poll here. So what is then loneliness? Before we talk about executive loneliness, what is loneliness? So here are the results. And I can see that the one that you most believe is lost the belongingness, could be with their family or at workplace. Indeed, it is if you don't feel connected. If you go into your workplace and you might say hi to the people around you out of courtesy, but you don't feel a connection. That was certainly the case with me in 2018. I didn't feel that connection with people. Then I see you also say an unpleasant emotional response to perceived isolation. Yeah, because it's all in our head. It is that we perceive that we are isolated. We make up our mind that we are not there. It's a decision. Something inside us is not right, so we cannot connect with them. So yeah, actually all of these are, of course, correct. All of them are what is loneliness. And that leads me then to look at the next thing. So what is then executive loneliness? So here I am already in July 2019, invited on CNA radio, and they are inviting me, what is EGN, what do we do there, what do we do in the executive peer groups and so on. And they're asking me, what is then executive loneliness, Nick? I said, it's lonely at the top. And I know it's an old cliche, but it's so meaningful because it's the only way we really can explain this. It is really like a pyramid, and the higher you go in an organization, the more lonely it gets. So let's look at, if you are, for example, a GM in the Philippines. Let's say that you report to a regional director in Hong Kong or perhaps in Singapore, and then maybe the owners are in US. And you're reporting to your boss. Let's say you have a weekly or a monthly call. You're most likely going to talk about KPIs, deliverables, how is sales going, and especially now during COVID-19, you will talk about what do you do, cost cutting and so on. There's very little left over for conversation about how are you doing? How are you doing as a GM in Philippines in your role? And even if that question is asked, will you really, really answer it honestly? Most likely not. How could you spend in 5 minutes telling them what's going on in your life? And especially for senior executives, that is where we feel that we need to show that we are strong, that everything is good. So we just say, yeah, everything is great. Yes, we are in lockdown here, but don't worry, it's all good. Let's focus on cutting the cost instead. Let's just do this. All will be fine. But perhaps it's not fine always inside. But to admit that is the challenge. So and if we don't speak up about these challenges, that's when it can lead to depression. So let's look at some of the global numbers. These are official numbers that you can find in Google about the global depression numbers given by WHO. It shows that 300 million people globally suffer from depression. That is 5% of the people globally. That's a huge number. We then wanted to look into this. How are these numbers at the senior executive levels? And I tried to find research on this, and I couldn't find anything. So we conducted our own survey in Singapore, where we reached out to EGN members and we reached out to other senior executives, and they filled in our survey. And it showed that 30% of the senior executives currently are suffering from depression. This is a survey we did last year before COVID-19 kicked in. That means that it's 6 times higher than the global average. That is huge numbers. And that leads us then to check in on the next thing. Do people actually talk about this to people, or do they seek help at all when they have challenges with depression? No. The global numbers are 75% of those that need help mentally don't seek help due to the stigma surrounded by mental health. If you have pain in an arm, an elbow, something, we are not shy to go to the doctor to get treatment. But if it's something related to the head, somehow we don't want to admit it. Perhaps not to ourselves, perhaps not even to other people. We also asked this question then in our survey and study in Singapore of the executives, and it was quite aligned with the global numbers, even higher though. 82% of them said that they would not talk about depression or the loneliness and things that were going on in their head with their company or their bosses. So that just shows that people will keep the challenges inside them. So let's look at a few of these executives. I will share a few samples with you, a few of the people that I interviewed for my book. So this is Jane, and she is at the peak of her career. She's been working for one of the big 4 accounting firms. Already now during COVID-19, her department has had some cuts. She is now out of work. She has 2 young children who she needs to pay for their education. And she is currently going through a very, very challenging time. She feels she cannot be the mother she should be because she can perhaps not even pay for their school. She is now looking for jobs in this very difficult market. She has, for the first time, really, really hit a depression. She has a lot of anxiety inside her at the moment. But who can she look? Who's looking after her? She feels she cannot talk to anybody outside about this. Then we have Tony. Tony has built up a big FMCG company that basically now has lost all the business during COVID-19. He's worried that his company will go under. His wife is complaining and saying that he's a loser. You should build up something that is more stable. I've told you to do this. I've told you to do that. I've told you to get a job and not invest all our money in this business. So his relationship is falling apart. They're now in lockdown, having to spend time together, and he cannot go to his work. He cannot sort this business out at the moment. He is feeling an enormous anxiety. The pressures are building up. He also feels that he cannot talk to people about this. He's keeping it inside him. And then we have Pasha. Pasha is a regional director based here in Singapore, and I interviewed him for my book. And he said that his first relationship, where he was married, his wife divorced him because he was working too long hours. He then went and got another wife, and he's still married with her, but he found himself in a company where they wanted him to travel too much. He resigned from the job, and he, just before COVID-19, by end of last year, he signed up for another company who promised him not so much travel. His business is now collapsing around him. He's scared to lose his new job, so soon he might find himself with his new wife, without travel, but without a job. He has also huge anxiety on his shoulders now. How can he pay for this? How can he pay for his children? And he is also keeping most of this inside him at the moment. The pressure is so big when you don't talk about it. All of these 3 examples, and I could go on all day to talk about executives who are keeping this inside them. So how are we doing so far? Let's take a breath and stop for a moment. For me, it's emotionally challenging to talk about this. I shared with you my challenges. We're getting into how other executives are having challenges at the moment. So take a breath, and if you want, take up your phone. You can scan with a QR code there and connect with me on LinkedIn, and just take a break for a second, have a drink, and you feel free also to ask questions in the group chat for me to answer at the end. So let's continue. So let's look into the next topic here. Since people are so reluctant to talk about mental health issues openly, it's even worse about suicide. The suicide topic is a big taboo, especially in Asia. And when I started looking into this a year ago, it was a word that when I was interviewed on radio, I was briefed by the agency before, and they said, Nick, you cannot even talk about this in the radio interview. It's not okay. It's not socially acceptable to even mention the word suicide here in Singapore. And it is pretty much the same all over Asia. It's just a taboo topic. We don't talk about it. And of course, if you don't talk about the problem, you cannot solve it. And if we cannot admit that someone might have those thoughts, how can we prevent it to happen? So this is the next issue that I want to talk about. So my first question is a very difficult question to ask, and I'm not going to push everyone to answer it, but let's do a poll to see if you know someone, if you know of someone who committed suicide. I'm launching the poll there. You can answer yes, no, or you can say prefer not to answer. When I've asked this question, when I given my keynote in Singapore, about 30% of the audience raised their hand and say that they know someone, and that is aligned with the global numbers. When I was in January and I gave this keynote in Myanmar, there was an audience of 400-500 senior government officials, and I asked the question, do you know someone who committed suicide? There was 2 or 3 people at the back who raised their hand. They were simply too shy. They really couldn't even answer this question. Then I did this talk to a group in Myanmar last month online where they could answer the question just like this. And the answers then were 40%. So that just shows, due to the stigma also, they couldn't even raise their hand in a room to even say that they know someone. I'm now looking at the poll here. I have some answers that I will share with you. Let's see what result we have, and of course this is anonymous. We have one who prefer not to answer, and that is perfectly fine. But if I'm looking then at 42% say yes, that you know of someone who committed suicide. So that's a high number, but it just shows that this is a big number. But also here we see that people actually don't like to talk about this. It's not a comfortable thing to talk about. Well, that is the challenge with this topic, that people don't want to talk about it. So how is the pandemic then affecting the suicides? Well, it's not easy to find the numbers. When you try to Google or look into the statistics around suicide, many countries, they are hidden. It's not easy to get. So I've been looking into some of the news. You can see that the numbers are indeed inclining. I got some numbers there from Thailand. We've also seen reports that from Australia, they think that the numbers of suicide will outstrip the numbers of the coronavirus deaths in Australia. So for sure, we can see there's a tendency that the numbers are going up, but there's not an app where you can follow and track the numbers as easy as you can as coronavirus. Therefore, it's not a topic that we easily can talk about. And what we can see though is that it's basically we're living in a mental health epidemic with people suffering in isolation at the moment due to the COVID-19, but already the issue that was there before, especially for senior executives not being able to open up and talk about the challenges. And now, of course, with COVID-19, it's even worse. You are separated physically. It's even easier, more difficult, I should say, to connect and tell someone what's going on when you talk virtually. So that leads me to the last poll of today. So who experience more loneliness or depression? Those terms can be interlinked. One can lead to the other and so on. But who is experiencing more loneliness and depression? Is it men? Is it women? Is it the same? Or are you not sure? We'll stop for question and answers in a little while. Okay, I have the majority, so let me end the polling and share the result with you. So here we see it says who experience more loneliness, men or women, and we have a majority here saying that it's 57% men, 7% women, 36% think it's the same. So this is a topic that's been discussed a lot. And what we do know though is that the statistics show that more women are depressed than men. But is that the full truth? Probably not, because if you think about it, women tend to have a few close friends which they are very open with, a few friends that they will tell what's going on in their life. The men, on the other hand, tend to keep it perhaps secret, even for the close friends, what's going on, especially if it's related to mental illness. So if you are then a woman and you're having some issues and you are telling a friend, the friend is very likely to say, well, why don't you go and see a doctor? They will probably even find a few phone numbers, give them, why don't you call this counselor? I know this doctor, I can come with you to the doctor, why don't you do this? So they're already starting to open up a little bit and get some help. And therefore, when the woman comes and gets support, and it's in the statistics, of course, then the doctor seen, and therefore the statistics seems to be higher for women. That is one way of looking at it. Another way is that we also, women are going for hormonal balances, so that can lead to stress and so on. And that is something that is also shown and seen in the statistics. When it comes to suicide, though, we believe that there's more women that do commit suicide attempts, again, because more of them are reported, but that might not be the full story. Because at the end of the day, what we do know is that more men are committing suicide. That is the statistics, but the journey up to there is not really clear. So why are more men committing suicide? Well, they think that perhaps men are using more heavy tactics, such as guns and so on, and succeeding, while for women it's a cry for help, but maybe they're not doing as drastic measures. So then I wanted just to look into a last point, and that is this digital transformation increasing executive isolation. Feel free to write your thoughts in the chat box. I was invited to the Digital Transformation Forum in Singapore in December last year to talk about is digital transformation increasing executive loneliness. And I said, well, obviously, if you are separated and all you do is chatting on WhatsApp or you're just sending emails, you don't see the facial expressions, you don't have the real connections. So that is indeed, for me, it was certain that this digital transformation, the world we are living in, where we are connecting virtually rather than meeting in person. Before, we used to belong to the local clubs, we belonged to many teams, we had many societies where we spend a lot of our time connecting with other people, meeting them in real person and doing meaningful things together. We generated some close friendship by that. And that is basically, according to me, is not there anymore. And of course, during the lockdowns that we have now, we are physically distanced from our friends, from some of our family, perhaps that are living in other countries, other cities, and it's increasing the isolation. So how can we then overcome executive loneliness? What should we do? So let me share with you, to end my talk today, with how I overcome executive loneliness. You can remember that I shared with you earlier today, just when I hit the rock bottom, when I've written my will and my testament, I started to open up to some people and I started to come back to life. Here's a picture of me from August 2019. So just a little bit over 1 year after the photo of my swollen foot, when I was completely overweight, when I'd given up on life, when I mentally and physically was breaking down in pieces, when I thought that my life was over, I started to just tell my wife what was going on. I then went to see doctors and I told doctors what is wrong with me, how I'm feeling. I told specialists, I went to see 2 different counselors. I also saw a counselor, a family counselor, to talk about my relationship problem with my ex-wife and my son, how we separated. We didn't have any closures. They helped me to go through all these steps and make things right around me, to fix the relationships I had, to make amends to them. I also addressed my alcohol problem that had occurred during that time, so I stopped drinking alcohol. It's actually now 2 years I haven't had 1 drink of alcohol. It's a choice everyone can make, but in my case, I had to really take action because I was basically dying. So this photo here, is me at the finish line of Ironman Sweden in August, where I just had completed a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer cycle, and run a marathon at the end. And that was in 13 hours I completed that race. It just shows that you can really, really turn around your life. And my key message from today is that whatever is happening inside you, whatever you are feeling, talk to people, open up to people, and especially check in with your employees. Try to encourage them to open up, but they will not unless you, as an executive, as top of the organization, opening up. yourself. And it starts by being vulnerable, showing that you care, and also that we as executives, we are not perfect. We also make mistakes, and we can also suffer. We're only humans, all of us, at the end of the day. So if you're going through a challenging time now during COVID-19, start today by making a difference, by telling people around you. People, you will be amazed that they will listen. So I added this slide of my new gravestone that I made. I'm looking forward to a longer, more positive life. I'm very happy with the changes in my life. And with that note, I wanted to open up the floor to see how can we overcome executive loneliness. I shared with you my story. I share what helped me to overcome it, but there's many ways apart from me, in my way, being opening up and getting healthy by diet and exercising. And Jesper, perhaps I can hand over to you to see if there's some questions from someone.